Hey folks, I just hadn't made a video in a minute and wanted to touch base. So, um, I finished that book by the founder of Freemasonry about the underworld, Elysium. Or actually, I haven't finished reading all of it, but it's pretty interesting. Like I skimmed to the end, but now I'm like reading the rest of it. So it's clear that it's like pro-Protestant, anti-imperialist. It's very much against imperial expansion. So like I think that the Freemasons were actually good or at least neutral at that time, like in the early 1700s. And I think it's the Grand Lodge of England, you know, when it went public, it it made it easier for it to get co-opted, and it maybe might have made it more necessary to be co-opted because it became more powerful. And since it was a Whig institution for the most part, and since it was you know the Tories that were basically in charge. I mean, I think like this um I mean, there was like a group of Whigs that were basically Tories that that after George the Third or George the First of Hanover, ascended to the British throne. Um, he was supported by the Whigs, so that's the liberals, the constitutionalists, as opposed to the monarchist, absolutist conservatives. And so, all the monarchs themselves most of the royal family tended to be conservative because that's what conservatism is. It's like royalism. I mean, nowadays there's people who use conservatism to mean like populist, but that's just another way that people don't know English anymore. Um, but yeah, so the conservatives but there was Whigs that were basically conservatives, like George the Third, um, of revolutionary infamy, um, that we fought the American Revolution against. Um, George the Third was uh, basically a Tory. Like he was ostensibly a Whig. Like even the people around him probably called themselves Whigs, just because they favored the revolution settlement. They were fine with Protestant succession. Um, but at the end of the day, they were Tories because they didn't respect the Constitution that was laid down in 1689 and 90 by the Revolution. So, and that's why we had to rise up against them. That's why we called them Tories, because even though George the Third considered himself a Whig or posed as a Whig, he was a Tory, and anybody could tell you that. And honestly, all the Tories, all the avowed Tories, were on his side. So that basically showed where he stood. So it was probably those Whig Tories, like the Tories in Whigs clothing that under George the Third, maybe under George the Second, I'm not sure, but basically they were probably the ones who took over Freemasonry. Like Freemasonry, like the Grand Lodge of England, quickly started to admit royals to its uh, membership, and even I believe appointing them as, or like, yeah, basically appointing them as Grand Masters of lodges. So it's basically like it seemed like there was they kind of took it over and then turned Freemasonry into like just a secretive version of the the normal power structure, as opposed to originally Freemasonry had been a separate thing, had been somewhat independent, and it had been anti-authoritarian. Um, but once it went public, the monarchists basically took it over, and then they just made it just as authoritarian, arguably, as society by putting the royals as grandmasters. So basically, just replicating what they had originally been an alternative to. So, and and you know the things said about the Grand Lodge of England, like the Grand Lodge of England got co-opted by the royals and by their minions, but the Grand Lodge of Scotland and the Grand Lodge of Scotland and the Grand Lodge of Ireland um, were more mixed at the least. There was a lot of more egalitarianism in them. Um, like one thing people don't realize is like mass murdering rapists basically have controlled the world. Like they've like the monarchs of almost every country have like had no scruples in killing anybody to keep power over the last 5,000 years, at least as long as there's been writing, and probably longer. So they make everything that exists under them a reflection of that. That's why I never trust people who are too obsessed with you know that just think, oh, we just have to stop the new world order and then everything's good. But it's like it's not new. Like if you think, I don't know, people either get caught up in saying it's new and like, oh yeah, everything's been fine, we've all been good patriarchal, conservative people, and now these reptiloids are coming and ruining it all. Um, but then there's also the people who say that it's ancient, and that the reason that the elites are bad is because they have some ancient pagan, plan or whatever it is. I mean, they might have ancient pagan plans, but just the idea that somehow, like, that people either try to say like bad, old is bad or old is good, and both are, to me, like childish, because if you have a fucking clue, you can see that it doesn't matter. Through all of history, we've been controlled. Most of y'all are fine with it, so I don't. I mean, I don't know. A lot of people are fucking fine with it as long as it's there, as long as it's Trump in power, or I don't know, somebody that they like, um, or maybe Bernie, right? Bernie. I mean, if we could see all the stuff that he's okay with over the last few years. Bernie is nothing to really, um, you know, uh, he's he's pretty worthless, I had to say. Like granted, he was not, um he refrained from like being the foremost type of, from being loudly pro mandate and loudly pro lockdown, but he was just quietly cucked, quietly chimed in, and or at least stayed quiet at the, he never contradicted them. He contradicted them. I mean, he said in 2020 or something like, "Oh, I don't support mandates," but they all said that in 2020, so that means jack shit. Um, so I'm just saying, like, if people think Freemasonry is the source of all problems, I don't know. Maybe it is, but I had to see like, I mean, no, it's clearly not, because a lot of the problems predate and are almost universal. But the fact that Freemasonry became like elitist makes sense, because every institution that's not elitist is destroyed every generation. Like, you know, like anything that's has any power or influence, if it's if it's not elitist, it will be destroyed quickly, or it will be co-opted. And in this case, it was co-opted, at least in England. Like in Scotland, it was more egalitarian for the most part, but even there, I think it just succumbed to the conservatism of the time in the like 1770s when Scotland became the most right wing place on the planet, basically, or like it was basically the Scots, the Ulster Scots, who had moved to Ireland and then moved on to Appalachia in America. They were the most radical people in the Western world, basically, and the Scots who had stayed in Scotland became the most conservative people in the world because, or I mean, arguably, because they were leading they were the leaders of George III's attempt to stop the revolution. Like the Scots lost the most by the revolution because the royal governors of almost every colony in America were Scottish, and almost all the tobacco trade was run by the Scots. So, that was the source of Glasgow's wealth. Glasgow is basically built on like Virginian tobacco. So so Freemasonry there took on, probably became more conservative just for that reason, that the country became more conservative. Whereas in Ireland, it stayed relatively radical. And I mean, I don't know. It just weirds me out when people are so dismissive of Freemasons without understanding like how everything was Masonic. Like the Masons founded, you know, they founded like the United States. It's like everybody was a Freemason. The enemies were a Freemason. Like, like people on the Tory side were Freemasons, the Whigs were Freemasons. Um, like I'm not ruling out that somehow maybe they're all orchestrating some nefarious thing, but the people who just say, "Oh, well, they're all Freemasons. All these powerful people are Freemasons, therefore it shows like I don't know. If there's a good argument against Freemasons, I haven't heard it. I hear a lot of stupid arguments against them and really bad arguments, which make me like them. So I don't know if they're good or bad now. I'm sure a lot of them are bad and some of them are probably good. Um, but the more people like trash them with completely insane and stupid non-arguments, the more I sympathize with them because people do the same to me, you know. Um, and plus it's just I see this the scapegoat mentality where people want to select like the people want to witch hunt, like a lot of the supposed like populists who are anti-mandate, pro-freedom, but a lot of them are like they have the witch hunt mentality of like, oh my god, the elitists are occultists, they're Satan worshippers. And it's like I just don't know, like when somebody says that stuff to me and it's like they're more concerned, like we already knew the elites are wiping us all out, the whole planet. They're wiping out our species. But the problem is no, the problem is not that. The problem is that they said hail Satan supposedly. And like, it must be exposed. We must expose that. Honestly don't care. They can say anything they want. The fact that people think that that's the issue, what deities or what religion they had. I mean, unless it hasn't been explained to me the right way. I guess they claim that they have this anti-morality religion, Zabbatai Zevi, and the millenarian branch of Judaism, which is like anti-morals and yada yada. But like, it's just I'm skeptical because like it's never taken that it's never that's never been a requirement for evil to be part of some special religion. Like Christians, I mean, it's like a lot of this criticism almost universally either comes from Christians who will refuse to acknowledge the millions and millions of people that Christians have murdered, or or even non-Christians who just, kind of identify with the Christians or kind of think of the Christians as still the good guys, and still, like, it just comes from a fundamental place of ignoring the millions of boys that the Catholic Church and all these churches have raped, the millions of, you know, I just don't. I just, like, that's true. It's like you can't say, oh, everything is the Freemasons' fault without openly giving a pass to every other blatantly evil, like Christian, etc., etc. Just like all the rulers of the world throughout history to try and like scapegoat some little like or big club or whatever. It's a tell. It's a tell. It shows the person saying it doesn't have morals, that they would be the witch hunter, or it suggests, that they might be the person that's more inclined to be the witch hunter, which is like the same mentality as the people who hate us. The only difference is these are like conservative witch hunters, and then the kind of, um I don't know, modern witch hunters are the ones who hate the anti-vax and hate the unvaccinated and hate the people who question lockdowns and whatever. But it's the same knee-jerk refusal to like examine the nuances and just demonize some whole group of people. It's lazy. It's like blatantly lazy. Like there's nobody, even themselves, who is fooled by it and who thinks it's anything other than just being too lazy and irresponsible to determine the truth. So you just scapegoat like a whole group of people. And if you know the inside scoop that really proves it all, and you're not saying it to me because nobody has given me the proof that like it's all the fault of the Illuminati Freemasons, um, then you're just as bad. Then you're worse than the Freemason Illuminatis, I guess, because you're hiding the proof for it and you just want people to have faith in you like some grandmaster. Um, so anyway, I think like uh like unions were largely came from Masonic lodges. Uh the United States was founded by Freemasons. Um the French Revolution was led by Freemasons, and I mean it's like I kind of understand the people who are against the French Revolution because of how it went, like how the terror, how like Robespierre basically did a coup and took over and like, you know, killed so many people. But like but people who are against the American Revolution, which actually is a bunch of there are definitely a lot of conspiracy theorists who see the American Revolution as a nefarious thing, and they see like based on like the original conspiracy theory kind of, or the kind of classic one of proofs of a conspiracy uh by Robeson, John Robeson or whatever, um where he blamed it all on Franklin for like laying the seeds of the Illuminati revolution that was kicking out all the good, wonderful